Tal Braun. You heard me reference him in the Stu Peters interview and other interviews. I want to welcome now to the show Dr. Tal Braun. And Dr. Tal Braun, I want you to give us your bio. Give us some of your background first. And tell us why it is we should listen to you, because you have felt not listened to for 2 years. You said you've been suspicious. This has been the case. Welcome to the show, Dr. Tal Braun.
Thanks, Doc. Well, first of all, it's just really, I want to use the word thrilling to know that you're unpacking this with me. I also know that we're in for a roller coaster of a ride because it's been 2 years, and I was able to dissect, understand, work out some of the basic mechanisms of COVID-19, which we need to talk very clearly at the beginning of this. There's going to be a bunch of biological terms here, and I'm not going to get into the detail of the mechanics. We can do that in another session, and to unpack this properly deserves the attention that it deserves to a lethal disease. And I also don't want fact checkers and everybody and their auntie who's become overnight experts in all kinds of stuff that they had no qualifications for before. I don't want them going, he doesn't know the difference between fluoxetine and fluoxamine. And so I want to be very, very cautious with how deep we go into some of the biology, and I want to unpack that in a much more sophisticated way because it deserves it. I also want to start off by saying, before I even get into my bio, this is a serious subject because ultimately this has been a culling, a form of genocide in its best definition. Of course, there's been collateral damage, but the bulk of the deaths around the world have been of the aged and the vulnerable. And those aged people, this would be a culling in any other species or population control of even, let's say, a game park. The people that are managing that population for the sustainability of that area would ultimately decide to cull the aged first, and then and of course the weak, vulnerable, and sick. And so this has been a genocide. And even though we might even get into something where there's some sort of humor and things to lighten up a very dark subject and to make this almost to be able to cope with the psychology of this kind of crisis, humor becomes really important. It's something that I teach in all forms of critical incidents and mass killings and trauma. And so I don't want anybody to misinterpret any sort of lightness towards the severity of this subject. I also want to say that part of this for me is that you're going to hear that there's been I've been on a roller coaster journey, and I've been ebbing and flowing between bringing out the information of the cause, the mechanisms, but then realizing that when that didn't gain traction, I switched gears and I said, okay, now I understand the mechanisms. I have to look at being able to impart good mitigation strategies, prevention strategies, and it's a good segue to explain who I am and the work I do. So the bulk of the work that I do is considered in the realm of threat assessment and threat management, and the core of that work for me is teaching. I absolutely love empowering people rather than being a subject matter expert or consultant that builds up a company that other people go do the work. When it comes to threat assessments and threat management, these are basic principles of survival, and they become more complicated. But when you empower more people to do the work, then you share that heavy lifting, and generally cases of dangerousness is ultimately what we're looking for, become easier when the burden is shared across a community and also requires a multidisciplinary team. So there's a core principle of threats that needs to be understood that helps to understand where I'm coming from. As somebody who's involved in the counterterrorism community, as somebody who teaches counterterrorism, which includes bioterrorism prevention and response and biowarfare prevention and response. I have to understand threats. I have to understand weaponry. I have to understand strategy. You can get into the weeds of agenda with this, but that takes years to unpack. And it's very, very difficult often to get into the minds of perpetrators. But what is easier is to understand that strategies tend to be universal. Strategies also tend to have a copycat element to it. And as I'll paraphrase it, but there's nothing new under the sun, and there's always reinvention. So in looking at my original question that my clients, which include state level clients, reached out to me and said, Doc, is this biowarfare? Is this bioterrorism? What are we dealing with over here? And so part of that for me was I started looking at what is going on, what are the mechanisms. And what I teach is you have to take a step back. You have to involve other people. You don't ever criticize or neglect to follow up on anything that sounds like a stupid question or an irrational thought. And that is the benefit of having a community approach, a multidisciplinary approach. So if somebody says, hey, I'm curious, this is kind of strange. Why is it doing this? Why is it doing that? Those are the leads that you chase, as well as the things that you're being shown. If you are dealing with a perpetrator, you've got to know that there's going to be distractions. And so you've got to look at what those distractions are, what are they doing to ultimately hinder the solving of a problem. And this is the bulk of the work that I've been doing over the last, it's almost a decade now. I'm a psychologist by background. I don't practice as a psychologist. I don't see patients. I'm not a medical doctor. I consider myself somebody who teaches how to understand threats, which ultimately is a reading, an assessment, an appraisal of danger, and then ultimately unpack information from the world and from people and from history that say this is what you would do with this particular threat. And part of that is I'm gonna come back to you, Doc, by saying that a core principle that has guided my work through the beginning of this is that a core principle of threat assessment and threat management is not all threats are a threat to everyone, and not all threats are a threat at all times. So there's a temporal component, and then to all threats, including a virus, including a pathogen, including a perpetrator. And then there is this overreach often that dangerousness is dangerous to everybody. So a threat is not always a threat to everyone. It can be very, very specific. And so that guided me in my assessment and management approach to what was being called and is still being called a pandemic, a viral pandemic. And that's a good segue to come back to you, Doc.
Love it. All right. So on your emails, I noticed even on the letter to the FBI, and you mentioned it here just a second ago, it actually has under your name where you signed it to the FBI that you wanted to make them aware that this is more of an envenomation than it is a respiratory virus. In all the research you had seen, you actually have underneath your name the title U.S. National Counterterrorism. And you just mentioned counterterrorism. I want you to speak more on how it is you had the confidence to even communicate directly with the FBI. You mentioned people in states, like people on state level you've been able to work with in the past. But give us some more awareness of, you don't have to give names and specifics, but
sure.
I just want to know more of the level of your intelligence and connection.
Yeah, I mean, basically what's been what everybody has felt, and I've had people to say, nurses that really understand this disease, nurses that have understood what you were saying about remdesivir, nurses that have understood, hey, the ventilators are killing people, doctors that are understanding that the ventilators were killing people. Everybody thought this was a credibility issue, a credentialing issue. I've had a credentialing issue from the entire time that I've arrived in the States, and that my degree as a psychologist and my credentials as a psychologist didn't allow me to be a psychologist in the States. At that point, I think I'd had, I don't even know how many years of schooling, 12 years of schooling. I did a pre-med, I have a Bachelor of Science. I then did a postgraduate in psychology. I then did a 6-month internship in psychological and diagnostic testing that includes, understanding statistics and laying out methodology for research. And then I went on and I did what was a master's in science, and it always followed I've had a background in the medical and science world my entire life. That's what I've been involved in. That's what I've dedicated my pursuit of understanding this world. And with all of those credentials, and then eventually, over the last decade, getting to the point where I train FBI agents, I train CIA agents, I train local law enforcement, state level law enforcement. I mean, in conferences that I go to, I am a law enforcement trainer, I am a public health trainer, I am a emergency management trainer. And my job over the last few years has been the bridge to help people to manage incidents of intentional violence where it becomes a mass killing. So, for example, there was just a mass killing in Sacramento. I trained, a county, state level clients and county level clients of my clients in California. The same thing across the country. I've done testimony for the Senate in Texas on mass violence. I am the go-to guy on unpacking, helping people to really understand the incredible information that the threat assessment and threat management community. There's an organization called the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. I've been a vice president of a chapter of that organization. And so the intelligence community knows me well. I've trained a lot of them in various topics, and I've also helped them to take their language and help public health to understand what they're trying to do. I've helped bridge the knowledge on emergency management. For example, in a hazmat situation, you might talk about a hot zone, a cold zone. In a fluid situation where you have mass violence that is ongoing, that hasn't stopped yet, like a Vegas situation, all of that has to be taught to people. Where do people set up posts to do the work that they're doing, knowing that there's a sniper in a building, like in Vegas, in the Mandalay on the 32nd floor? Where do you set up reunification points with that amount of people and family members arriving? Where do law enforcement and emergency management and everyone else arriving even park their cars so that you don't cause a parking lot situation like what happened at Terminal 2 shooting in Fort Lauderdale? That's the bulk of the work that I teach, as well as helping people to understand and analyze a threat. So whether it's a school board, a district that's got a concern about a student or numerous students that are plotting a school attack, I'm the go-to guy that is often brought in to help teach this. But more importantly, a lot of my work post-teaching is I encourage people every time I teach to reach out to me and say, hey, Doc, what is this? Hey, Doc, is this something that we should be looking at? I keep myself very well versed in current trends, things that are trending. I keep myself very well versed in technology, including the type of technology that was used for this attack. And more importantly, I've sat in preparedness conferences for years now, where smallpox or Ebola is talked about in terms of what needs to be done and what would that look like for a city and what mutual aid could be brought in. And so I felt very confident to send it to the FBI, and I sent it to two departments, one of which is the Division of mass weapons of destruction. And I also sent it to the people that I normally deal with at the FBI, that are the people following up on the potential of intentional violence. And that is a really stellar unit it's a behavioral analysis unit out of Quantico, and they've just done extraordinary work. For every attack that the public has heard of that's taken place, whether it's a school or a workplace, that's the team that has stopped the hundreds or thousands of attacks that could have potentially happened. Prevention work is really, really a curious and somewhat sort of absurd work environment, because unlike a performance, when you prevent an attack, there's no applause. The thing didn't happen. So the work is often extremely personal, and the reward is often extremely personal. Because if you've stopped something take place, there's no medal that says, hey, you did this great job of stopping this terrorist attack. Why? Because the attack didn't take place. If you get shot in that attack, of course, those people are heroes too. But the bulk of the heavy lifting that's done to prevent the work, nobody sits around going, wow, that was incredible. You managed to get that kid out of that school help. So I hope that helps to understand that, this was not a credentialing issue. And in fact, Doc, I got to tell you that you've been feeling 4 months of anxiety. I've been feeling 2 years of anxiety around this topic, because ultimately I blamed myself. It wasn't for me. It wasn't a matter of credentials. It was a matter of articulation. And I will still own the death toll, a part of the death toll around the world, as a personal failure. What else could have I done to get myself in a position where I would have been listened to? What was, how did I change my words to make sure that it wasn't heard as a conspiracy theory? Why did I just get a received thank you from the division that manages weapons of mass destruction, where the email very clearly and very confidently says, I'm your guy, I'm ready, I'm willing, I'm able. This is the stuff I teach. Why not give me a phone call? I've certainly had correspondence with the FBI offline about numerous cases where I brought them information to follow up on. I've had dialogue with people, like I said, that turned to me. So in this case, what people warned me is, a lot of people warned me, don't go near this. Don't go near this until you know that other people are looking at it with you, that it becomes protection with more people involved. The people are concerned that people have been killed over this. And so people said, hey, you're on your own on this right now. So that was a very conscious decision for me to continue on being extremely vocal until LinkedIn deplatformed me. I was one of the first, if not the first, that got a lifetime ban from LinkedIn. I think Malone or Van der Bosch got banned at around the same time, and then all of a sudden they were back on, and then I was back on for a while, and then I posted information on the Venom again, and I went back and forward with their person over there, gave them the evidence that I wasn't spreading misinformation on the Venom, and boom, I got an email to say, nope, I'm out and cannot have an account again. And so it's not like I held back. I just held back on sort of trying to bring this to the professionals that really should have been looking at this. And I rather just brought it to people that wanted to help, wanted suggestions on, what they could tell their patients. I've been working with a lot of doctors. I've been working with a ton of scientists. I started my own group of scientists to basically eventually take this now and run conferences where we teach doctors how to treat this disease. And I'll come back to another segue with this, which is that the primary work with my tactical, the tactical side of the work that I've done is I'm an instructor for an organization out of Texas called Alert, which is the national standard for training tactical instructors on how to deal with an active attacker. We don't even use the word active shooter, once again, because it makes people look in a certain way at what the weapon is. For example, when you use the word shooter, you stop people preparing for a mass stabbing or for a Molotov cocktail or for somebody setting a fire to a building in another way, or using an IED. Right? There are so many ways that somebody can cause harm that even our word choice, the nomenclature, becomes really important. So as an instructor to tactical officers, part of it is we have a very basic premise. Those tactical officers are taught they have two goals. They need to stop the killing, which is, in other words, get into the building or get into the terrain, and you neutralize that threat, whatever that means in terms of stopping the person doing the killing. That might be killing the killer, or it may be using a taser, or it may be that the person surrenders or suicides. And then the second goal, and it's followed in that order on purpose to save lives, is you stop the dying. And so I have been doing both for 2 years. That is my goal. And that's my work mission. That's what I teach. And that's where my integrity is. And that's what I've been doing. And this show, I'm doing this with you because it fits with my mission. It fits with what I'm tasked to do for this great nation and for the world, which is stop the killing and stop the dying.
Now, I want to reaffirm a couple things, Dr. Tal Braun. One was, you mentioned it here, but I want to get kind of your feelings about it on these two things, because you told me on the phone when I called you that first day and reached out to you. We had never talked before. I didn't even know you existed until I saw your name on an email from June, and that was just like 2 weeks ago. And you told me, my question was, did the FBI ever respond to your letter? And you said, I got a 3-word response. So I want you to confirm again that this response was what? Give us
this response was received. Thank you.
Now I want to know. And then I asked you again, have you heard anything since?
Nope, not a word.
How did that make you feel? How has that made you feel?
Well, I think what it makes me feel is what a lot of people in this country are feeling. And I certainly can, I don't speak for law enforcement, but I can tell you the general tone of law enforcement for years now has been, there's a couple of things that have taken place. Politicians are pleasing crowds rather than, basically getting the job done and protecting, what looks like a short-term win to a politician is a long-term failure for a community. And you can see that across the country. And the other side to that is, to achieve that, you have to compromise the agencies. And I don't think that I'm the only person who believes, and I cannot speak for another human being on this planet, I certainly believe that our large agencies in the United States of America and some of the large agencies that regulate and govern and help support communities across the world have absolutely been compromised. And they've been compromised by capitalism, by a filthy form of capitalism, which is that it is capitalism without the basic safety measure of ethics. Right? A regulatory board ultimately is an ethical board. You cannot have, for an example, you cannot have a new experimental drug being put onto the market that has massive ethical concerns. We're talking about genetic therapy in terms of these mRNA so-called vaccines. The definition had to be changed to after hundreds of years of the idea of what immunization looks like, it had to be changed to suit a new product, right? So you're bringing out a motorcycle and you decide that it doesn't need a motor, and instead of calling it a bicycle, you call it something else because you still need to sell it as a motorcycle. Right. And so it is the same thing. And the easiest way to see that the ethics of capitalism is the problem is you've got Fauci's wife is in charge of the regulatory part of bioethics. I mean, that is a function. So in the same household, you have two people who have a mutual goal of bringing out new medication, which may be great, may not be great, depending on what it is. But the person that's looking over to see if this is ethical, if the pursuit of the experiments are ethical, if the way it's been set up, has there been any coercion of any third parties? I mean, the person in charge of that is Fauci's wife. I mean, that makes no sense. And I could explain that to a 10-year-old and they could say, well, that could be a problem. That's no good. Right. But so we live in this adult world now where nobody wants to fix these very, very basic structures. Let's talk about the FBI. Right. During this time, you can see how badly the FBI has been compromised. And I want to be clear because these people are my colleagues. Some of them are my friends. And I always use the word brothers and sisters. I want to be clear that there's a difference between individuals that go to work and do the best they can in a really shitty system, right, and have everything, against them to get the job done versus what the organization becomes, right? The organizational culture, the organization's agenda. That's very different. It becomes very important for me to say there are great people that work at all of these agencies. So let's talk about the FBI, right? The FBI has spent more time looking at the U.S. Capitol, quote unquote, invasion where a lot of their agents were there. A lot of their agents were helping to make sure that that took place, right? On public record. They admit they were agents, they were involved, they infiltrated these groups. Now, just like anything else, that can take a long time, but they have spent so much time and money, right? But like minuscule amounts get thrown at trying to understand the Vegas killing, or trying to understand the San Bernardino public health mass slaughter, right? Minuscule amounts. Though the terrorist department were open to the public, I think it was within 24 or 36 hours. There were journalists. I mean, there was a woman walking around a dog in a terrorist apartment. There was footage back from then where there was a drawer open and there was some hatchet or something in a drawer. And I was thinking to myself, well, with mass killings, they often go out and they hurt other people first. Why is forensics not even taking that in? Does that match a killing somewhere, right? They don't have the resources thrown at it. I've had mass killings take place where state troopers weren't assigned outside a victim's house, parent's house, so that the media gets in there and charity organizations get in there while people are being traumatized. And yet they spend time working out strategies to send agents out to school board meetings with people complaining about masks and labeling those people domestic terrorists. I mean, partly the lighting in here is making my head look red and my face look red, but I'm angry. I mean, a lot of people say you sound angry. I don't sound angry. I am angry. I mean, we're living in a time period where our Constitution is not only being tread on, I mean, our Constitution is being put through a giant machine to tear it up, like at a landfill, at a waste dump. Our Constitution is not just being shredded, it is being destroyed daily. And so, yes, these agencies have been compromised. There is no doubt in my mind that people would be doing a better job if they were given a different set of directives and if they were given the support they were needed. I mean, the intelligence, there is an intelligence document that looked into the quote unquote lab leak in Wuhan, right? I mean, I've gone through it. I can unpack it with you at another time. It is high school level ridiculous observation, and I wouldn't even begin to call it science, because why are you looking at just one building? Why are you calling it a leak when some of that early footage out of China literally shows that, and we can use this as a segue to get into the pathogen, in high concentrations, this spike protein acts as a nerve gas. You can see that in the videos. You can see that. Why are we calling it a leak when you can clearly see that these are either massive clouds or some other form of purposeful attack, just like China said? So when we make our enemies, right, the population, not the presidents, not the government, the people, we use terms like China did this, or Russia's doing that, or Ukraine's doing that. No, we need to start using individual names. That's the important part over here. That's how you start fixing this big mess that we're in. It is a form of stereotyping, and there's no safety in it when you say China did this or the US did this. This needs to be a lot more personal to basically understand what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I anticipate we're going to have a lot more interviews, Dr. Tao. I would actually like to wrap this one up in about 10 minutes, but to segue out of it, what I want to do is make people aware of this. When you say that we should stop putting like countries, Ukraine, Russia, China did this, blah, blah, I get it. You know, they're not doing it with me. They didn't say anti-vaxxers are the problem. No, they singled out doctors by name.
Sure.
Dr. Zev Zelenko, Dr. Brian Ardis are people who need to be taken out and need to be silenced and are responsible, blah, blah. All right. So I want to also confirm, not only were you disappointed, and now are you absolutely certain that the organizations of the FBI are compromised, but when you decided in your letter to the FBI in June, you actually wrote you were willing to help them in their investigation in Wuhan. You wrote it, and then you also said you're open to helping and assisting in any way possible. You want to help them do this, and then you said that you were going to go public in a couple of weeks with this research you had. And then you told me on the phone that your own colleagues that you trusted, when you told them that you were going to go public, they told you that you should enter into possibly like witness protection if you're going to do this before you do it. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely, that's true.
All right,
that's absolutely, and there'll be no the public record of that. I mean, that's not the way that my community operates. These are very personal contacts, and this is a tone and a feeling. And certainly, you're aware of the safety issues in yourself, and some of that is that there are government entities involved, but more importantly, you've got even more danger when it comes to corporate entities that have their money in something. You know, you have entities that and personal people that are willing to kill people to make sure that their criminal enterprise can function. And so it makes common sense that there is a high level, not only of, I mean, people talk about deplatforming. I couldn't give a shit if I'm on LinkedIn or not. I mean, I lost 5,500 connections. Of those 5,500 connections, the people that I need are on my speed dial. I don't need LinkedIn to help me to connect to my world. What I need is LinkedIn to realize that the power that they have and what they use and they sell their advertising or whatever commercial pursuit they're doing, they are colluding and conspiring in crimes if they bury evidence that's going to point to how people are getting killed.
Amen
and
to that.
So I will probably see LinkedIn in court at some point or in a testimony in Congress or the Senate, because this needs to stop, right? This is a form of criminality. All right. We talk about things like, yelling into a theater. When you say, okay, well, it's a crime to go into a theater and yell fire because people could get hurt or killed. Well, what if there is a fire and you stop the person yelling and those people get killed, right? Then what? Isn't that just as much as a crime? Isn't it a crime to stop somebody that has vital information? Don't we set up all these information portals and tell people like myself to bring good intel? And then what? And whether it's done through an agency or it's the public, if people are silenced and censored, it makes the world an unsafe place. Because you want to wrap this up and because people are very, very hungry to hear the information around the venom. And I know some of that information has come out now. I want to make sure that I hit some of the most important points with you. And you and I will take a slightly different style with this. I have learned a couple of things. One is that I have done my best to control my language, right, around these topics, because I am not seen as an academic. And so people over years told me, hey, if you want to be taken seriously by as many people as possible and make that bridge, you have to start sounding like an academic, and you need to quit the foul language and the F-bombs. Well, bullshit to that. All right. I say an academic takes many forms. I am an academic. I am a scientist. I don't speak about things that aren't provable. And if something is a hypothesis, then it's a hypothesis. If something is plausible, it's plausible. There are word choices that scientists use all the time to make sure that the public is aware of how valid that information is.
Well, Dr. Tao, hold on, Dr. Tao. Hold on. Dr. Tao. All right, here we go. We're not done. We're going to let you go.
Good.
But no, we're going to let you talk here. Hold on. I just want you to know that what the academics are saying are dumbass things like this. These vaccines are safe and effective. The data looks good, but they don't give you the data. That's what the academics say. So I don't want you to sound like them. I want you to be you. I'm going to be me. I don't know why. Just so everybody knows, I actually met with Dr. Braun this last weekend in New Jersey, of all things, at a convention I was going to for 3 months. But I only knew about this guy for the last 2 weeks that he even existed. I knew that the Stu Peters interview, I had to bring this to light. I was already going to go film everything that I had that was now confirmed for me in my constitution, experience, clinical experience, my reasoning, my research, my scientific mind, everything. I'm absolutely certain that they are using venom to poison people around the world, and they're calling it a virus. I don't care what anyone in the world wants to conjecture up as the way or mode that they're actually using the venom or the poison. They're using venom to poison people.
Right, so this is a perfect way for me to get into some of the most important parts of the science to it, because I think that this is also why a lot of people were confused and why a lot of people go, okay, well, this guy is crazy because he just said there's, it's not viral. Yes, it's viral. There, as I said to the FBI, you can use this particular weapon with or without a viral component, right? The earliest form that I found so far that highlights exactly how to do this is a 1977 paper where they have taken a coronavirus and they have attached a lectin. Well, lectins are a form of venom. They are plant. That's the way plants protect themselves, and plants use venom. We just call them lectins and venoms. And you really need to think about glycoproteins and venom and plant-based venom, which are called lectins. You need to think them like two sides of Velcro, and there's interplay between the two of them, and ultimately they act as switches. And so when your body needs to understand what it's dealing with, it will actually have places in the body where lectins and venoms can bind. And that sets off all kinds of chain reactions. That is a reading system. That is a sensor in the body, which is why you don't need much of this. All the research is now showing that viral load does not equal symptoms. Somebody can have a low viral load and they can be desperately sick with this. Somebody can have a massive viral load and show no symptoms. That's because the viral load is basically like counting cars on a highway and making the assessment of who's in the cars as a level of dangerousness. Okay, it's got nothing to do with the number. It's who are the cars, what's their intent, what weapons have they got, why are they going there? So by counting cars, you don't get an accurate measure of dangerousness. So when you do a PCR test, for example, or these rapid tests that are binary, right? And you can, in our PCR test, you can hit whatever threshold you want. You can cycle out tiny, minute peptides, right? A tiny chain. And here was the mistake with the PCRs: is they chose a sequence of genes that are stable, right? Of the viral vector. And then that is very, very similar to many coronaviruses, which we come into contact daily. So not only are they not counting cars, at this stage, they're counting any form of transport and saying that there's a level of dangerousness, instead of saying, well, why is that person over there? How come everyone else is moving and that car is stopped? So coming back to the venom, what the issue is part two, we can really, really unpack how they did this and why it's important to get this understood and stopped. Is that the technology that the range of biowarfare called VX, there was a couple of issues with VX as a bioweapon, and VX are venom-based bioweapons that ultimately are nerve gases, nerve agents. And the issue with VX-based old technology is a couple of things. One is that it's expensive to make. Before you could manufacture this, before the ease of distillation of proteins, of peptides, of mRNA, before that, very, very different techniques were used to distill out poisons. The second part about it is why bioweapons were not used a lot in warfare is it's very difficult to create a bioweapon that doesn't take out your own people. So you have a combination now where the genomic sequence is known now across the board. And it's really funny because every week they'll bring out another paper that says, oh, we've now completed it. Oh, we've now completed it. How many times are you going to complete it? It will probably never be completed, because within each of those sequences and with each of those series, you're still going to have epigenetics and you're still going to have diversity. But knowing how to sequence proteins and tiny little peptides allows for something important for your audience to understand. There are proteins and peptides, and there are things called metalloproteins. And then there are things called kinases, which are ultimately, if you want to scale this up, it would be the equivalent of going into your kitchen and finding your sharpest knife that you would use to cut up a piece of steak. And that steak knife is the equivalent of a kinase. And then you have other proteins and peptides that inhibit that cutting up. And so ultimately, the body at any given time is in a form of fighting decay, decomposition. Longevity, in a wellness understanding of what longevity is it is adding anything that you can, whether it's behavioral, supplements, lifestyle, it is adding everything that you can for yourself as a person to fight death, to stop the unstoppable, to prevent your ultimate demise. And so ultimately, these bioweapons, the problem with them right now is that it has become really easy to be able to do this. And you don't need a BSL-3 or a BSL-4 lab, although on another call, I can show you where those labs are and what they're up to. But let's go back to the 1977 paper. They took a coronavirus and they stuck a venom on it. And then they were able to prove that binds really nicely. Right. So now you have a situation where you can take a coronavirus and you can mess with different proteins, okay, different peptides, different venoms, and you're attaching the spike. You're attaching the spike component onto the viral vector. And what they were saying in terms of the fact that the virus is the issue and all the antivirals that they're using is a distraction from eventually allowing them to be able to use that same spike as the medicine. So here's an old principle in that alchemists and healers used hundreds of years ago. There is no difference between a treatment and a poison. The only difference is the dose.
I love that. All right, so I want to ask you a question because we're going to wrap this up and we'll do some more. We'll schedule a whole bunch of these. It's going to be awesome because we have a ton to unpack. And I'm very excited to know. Oh, can I ask you a question real quick? I want to know, how excited were you when I reached out to you?
Okay, so I was very excited, but I was also thinking, shit, where's this dude been? I wish you and a lot of other people on McCullough's group. I got ghosted from that group as well. I got ghosted from many groups. Even the people that are on the right side of history will not go near the bioweapon part. And part of it is they literally, some people just don't understand it. It is the other aspect to it is that those that do understand it know what's at stake when you unpack this, and so they don't want to play in this playground. So I was both thrilled, and then I've got to say it all depends on what happens, Doc. You're not the first person to discuss this with me, and hopefully you're not the last. You're doing it differently, and I respect your bravery and your courage in the way that you're doing it. It feels good to stand at your side and bring this. It was extremely exciting to know that you understand the science part. And for your audience, I don't know how much will be unpacked by the time people are hearing this, but let's talk about the two most important parts of the science that you and I have spoken through. You have two what are called homologs. These are synthetic versions of a venom. And as you and I have discussed, you can call it a cobra venom, but it may not actually be from the cobra snake. It is from a lab. And more importantly, even then, it doesn't actually have to come from the cobra snake. That venom could be a perfect match evolutionary to a cone snail, and it could be a conotoxin, which is a venom from a marine snail. It could also come from parasites. Parasites have a very interesting relationship with venom. They work together. So the two venoms that are on the S protein of SARS-CoV-2 are cobra and crate. And you have a coagulant and an anticoagulant, and you have all kinds of disruptive mechanisms of those two weapons. It would be the equivalent of somebody saying, "Hey, we better stop that guy. He's got a knife." But that same perpetrator is also carrying an AR-15. So you've got to know that you're dealing with at least two weapons. The venom aspect is one aspect of this multi-purpose tool that makes up the spike. There are other aspects to this weapon that cause long-term harm, like the prion component. or the fact that I've just told you that venoms create affinity to other viruses. Oh, guess what? So now we're seeing an uptick in HIV, right? Now we're seeing RSV, right? So we've got to understand that once you introduce a venom into a system, you are causing what's called a massive redox reaction. It is changing the charges in that entire system. Electrons and protons are being switched out. Metals become really, really an important part of understanding. My pursuit in this goes way back 2 years ago when I started working and contacting the EPA, looking at a copper-based solution. That would have been a non-toxic solution that I told the EPA, I want this in every nursing home across the country. This is a non-toxic solution. And here's the buzzkill for the crowd that's listening to this that thinks these big agencies are protecting them. This is how dumb this conversation went. My concern was I can do this in a non-toxic way, but it's going to take me around 15 minutes to do what the EPA wants, which is to literally blow up, to dissolve the virus. I said, I've got a way that I can deactivate this virus on contact, right? The science on that is there's a tiny little negative charge on the spike protein. The spike protein is predominantly positive charge. Then you have a cysteine, which is negatively charged. And when you bring copper and zinc, when you bring copper or zinc or in combination to a spike protein, you denature it because it sticks to the positively charged spike protein using that tiny little spot. So I told the EPA, look, I can do this, and I can do it in what you want, which is to dissolve the whole thing, which is completely unnecessary. You actually just want to neutralize this. That's the safer way to do it. I said, but I can do it in probably just less than 15 minutes. And they said, no, doc, our rules over here, our regulation is you have to do it in 10. So I said, but we've got a non-toxic solution that can go out to the entire country. This is 2 years ago, right? We can go out and protect all of these vulnerable, fragile people, which, by the way, is not all fragile and vulnerable and aged. There is a genetic component to this. This is what they're able to fix that makes this a lethal weapon. This is why Putin invaded Ukraine, right? Because what those biolabs were doing in Ukraine was sifting through Balkan-type blood. They were looking to see how do you develop this where you can literally kill those people in those areas with very similar genetics. And how can you be so specific that you only kill off certain people within those genetics? So it's going to get even scarier that you can kill off certain syndromes now. You can kill off certain populations. Our current wonderful, completely incompetent CDC is currently monitoring sewage and collecting DNA samples. So come an election in the future, you can take out a whole voting block by giving them flu, and they're too sick to vote. Or you can just kill off a whole group of people, that's what's happening with our Native Americans, where their reservations sit on beautiful water tables. So that land is extremely valuable. I mean, we're in a full-blown corporate warfare that involves politicians, leadership, government, but most important, it involves a few corrupt individuals that ultimately want to play God with the planet that we live on, and they have purposefully decided to use the technology that ultimately can save lives. They've taken venom, which is one of the earliest biological forms of weaponry. I mean, it's used by creatures and it's used by plants to kill things. And now they are literally using that as a form of across the globe of biowarfare. And there's just no simpler way that I can say it. And for anyone who doesn't believe us, okay, fine, follow the science, because that's what your hashtag says, and let's unpack the science together. I will break down exactly what it's doing to the body. And then you'll see how dumb the medical community has been when every single headline across the last 2 years has said, mystery illness. And why is it causing, COVID toes? And why is it causing people to come into hospital and they're hypoxic, but they're euphoric? And I don't understand, when have we seen this amount of amputations with a viral disease? And why is it impacting glucose? Well, that's all venom based. And any venom specialist should be doing what we're now doing, and they should have been doing it for 2 years.
Absolutely.
And the fact that they haven't will let you know why. It's the same community that's involved in the viral aspect of this, and they are so reliant on grants and the pharmaceutical companies, because most pharmaceuticals, and Doc, you've already realized this, and we discussed this at length, most pharmaceuticals on the planet are venom-based.
You aren't kidding. And I had no idea how deep this ran. I had no idea. Zero, nada. But I do want to bring something to light. I showed you a document and a research study, and the world's already seen it by now. But in October of 2021, in Italy, remember this study? I just showed it to you, and you took a picture of it because you hadn't seen it. They took 20 COVID-19 positive patients in Italy in October. They checked their stool samples, they checked their urine and their blood. And then they took people who did not test positive for COVID-19, and they found in the COVID-19 tested, PCR tested positive patients for COVID-19, a total of 36 different peptides from animal venoms, 20 of which were snakes, including the crate, including the cobra, and then 16 of them came from this thing called conotoxin. And I had no idea what that was, even though I've seen a bunch of snail venom research as I've been doing this snake venom research. Did you know that since I found that study, did you know that there was actually research I have from 1989, where they announced in 1989 they can now mass produce conotoxin, alpha conotoxin, which is the most lethal form. They can mass produce it in factories synthetically, and it is just as bioactive as the real conotoxin. Now, if they've been able to mass manufacture that since 1989, you sent me a text and you're like, what is this link to the water? This is a marine snail, people. What's the likelihood they don't have enough to dump this in targets like Native American reservation water systems where they can target them all? I mean, how do you know this isn't what they're doing? They are all countries and governments around the world who have mass amounts of COVID-19 supposedly diagnosed. They all are having water system treatments supposedly from their health agencies. They're only messing with the water, testing for water samples of SARS-CoV-2, which is actually venom peptides. They're looking for that and identifying that, and then they're saying, as we find it in the water from your fecal matter, we can actually tell that same community that when the levels are high, that in 4 to 5 days, there's going to be an outbreak in that city. That's not how science works, and that's not logical. If you're finding it in the fecal matter of your water from a community at high levels, that means they already pooped it out. The venom already went through their body. That means they would have already had their symptoms. You're actually
let me jump in and tell you where there are some logical components, but used in you're spot on that it can be used in nefarious ways. So what they're really looking at, right, and why you can tell that the hospitals are going to get flooded with people is that your body is fighting this venom. And so you have a look at the cycle of this, and let's reattach the venom to the replicating part, right? Let's have a look at the fact that you've got 7 days where your body is fighting the threshold of the venom being produced, right? Because the virus is reproducing, and it's reproducing the code. And part of that code is that the virus has the spikes on it. And so it is using the body's resources to ultimately create venom in the body. And if it achieves within 7 days, around 7 days, it's not an exact number. It could be 6, could be 7, could be 8, could be 9, but around 7 days is when you have an opportunity where it, like a switch, and these are called chemical clocks, and bacteria are involved, and there's something called a quorum, which is like a voting system, and the system reaches a threshold of switches, and then the entire system changes over. So you have this system that is for basic entropy, right, this decomposition and order, and it's going into chaos. And then what happens is you have 7 days to shut that down. So if you are measuring peptides, if you are measuring even the viral component in sewage, and you are finding high loads, you know that you've got about a week before people are coming into hospital, because some of those people are not going to be able to cope with the threshold. They are crossing over. More specifically, what's happening with those people is their pancreas gets hit with those switches. And so now they got a combination of hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia, and the body is going back and forward between the two of them. So let's be clear on something. So far, what the CDC has said is they are measuring sewage, and they've been doing this for almost 2 years and didn't tell the public that they are measuring sewage. It started at colleges. They were measuring sewage, and they were doing it in China too. And part of that is to ask the logical question. Okay, so if you know it is in shit, and you know most viruses are fecal to oral, then why are you telling people not to worry about surfaces, not to worry about bathrooms? In all the tests that I've looked at where they've swabbed, what they were able to do is they were not finding this virus in the air. They were finding it on surfaces, on hospital railings, on windows, on cell phones, on even the sanitizer dispensing machines. That's where they were finding it, right? And so when you have somebody wearing a mask, okay, even the viral load is going to be on the outside of their mask. Then they're going to take the mask off. They're not going to be standing around with some person with a container to throw that mask away as a medical hazard. They're going to just take the mask off, put it away for later on, where they can put it straight back on, and increase their viral load that they put into their body. And more importantly, it's now on their hands, and they're going hand to mouth. This is how noroviruses work. This is how viruses work. So what the CDC failed to tell people, but I told my clients, my corporate clients, my state level clients, okay, go ahead, do what the CDC is telling you to do to mask your face. But the most important mask you're doing is you're putting a mask on the toilet. It's called a cover, a toilet seat cover, okay? Because that is the highest load. The highest load is on bathroom floors. The highest load is on bathroom doors and handles of viruses and bacteria. So it made sense to tell the public at the beginning about the hand washing. But guess what? It got out of control in terms of pushing this respiratory theory and telling people that they could stand away. And part of that is they may well be aware of the fact that venom gets into your saliva. So they probably don't want people spitting on each other. But guess what? You make copious amounts of saliva while you're eating. And so when do people take their masks off and sit close? When they're eating, when they're sharing food. Right. So the things people should have been told to look out for are not as important as the part that they were keeping back from the public, which is in any form of poisoning. Right. The outcome is going to be based on two things: the genetic load of what that poison does to a person. For example, somebody that's allergic to a bee is going to move away very quickly from a bee. A person who works with bees all day long that can get stung hundreds of times and nothing happens to them is not afraid of that bee, nor is it a threat. So the genetic component of how the body is going to react to a poison is what people should have been told. That's the test that should have been built, right? And that data is already available. It sits on chromosome 3, the threat. Okay, the second part that they should have told people is that it is very difficult to navigate the world and not come into contact with parasites, viruses, and bacteria. So basic hygiene, right, that goes back hundreds of years is the way that you deal with the mitigation part to it. Then you can bring in some tech like China did. UV light kills coronaviruses. They build tunnels that trucks drive through. They scan all of their food. They decontaminate all food that comes into their country. They're now starting to decontaminate mail because they just got Omicron from mail. The second part about that mitigation strategy is that is only useful to decrease the chance that you come into contact with a poison. But you come into contact with poisons every single day: allergens, pollens, pathogens, bacteria, other microbes. The best way that we could have helped people is to understand the wellness component, the health component. So things like, vitamin D, okay, should have never been called a vitamin. It's a hormone. It's a hormone. And so it is crucial to understand why the body is cycling through some of these resources, why it gets down to single digits, and why, if you were told, hey, your hormone has just crashed to lower levels that allow for survivability, hey, you need to take this supplement. But no, we didn't hear a word from the CDC or the FDA about basic health strategies. Okay, all we heard is that this device is coming, this new tech is coming, right? Then here's the part, we can start wrapping up on my end and do a part 2. But here's the part I want every person to understand. There is already loads of data. There is already loads of science around the fact that the viral component is only one part of this problem. The bigger problem is the spike protein. So what did they do? They took that highly lethal, pathogenic, short-term and long-term poison, a venom-based poison. I cannot be any more clear. They took that and they gave you, if you took the vaccine, a code. And that code was a trick where basically a cell that would not normally accept that code was told, hey, suck this code in and start printing more of this poison. Then they hope by the dose that they created that the body can take the 7 days and beat out the poison. And just like lab rats that are sacrificed as an experiment, they have worked out in their algorithm how many human beings can be sacrificed before it's a problem.
Dr. Tal
In
Braun.
medicine, one person would be the sacrifice that's a problem. One person. Yep. But in their algorithm of lab rats, they are prepared to let millions die because then the product is still, in their terms, safe and effective. Well, in my terms and your terms, it's not safe and effective.
You're absolutely right. We've come to the same conclusion, maybe in different directions. We're going to need to actually end this show, but I appreciate you, Tal Braun, so much for you standing for humanity, continuing your research, looking for antidotes and way to actually handle this. And that's what we're going to bring to light on the next shows with you here. I've got another show coming into this studio right now in about 5-6 minutes. So we're going to have to end this. But Dr. Tal Braun, give your final thoughts of hope and inspiration.
Final thoughts on hope and inspiration is it comes down to how it's always been on this planet. Do not rely on a few to solve your problems. Your issues and the things that you face and the threats that you face are personal to you. We have to go back to a world where the human being, the individual, is encouraged, informed, and skilled enough to be empowered to understand what the solutions are that are right for them.
You're awesome. Dr. Tal Braun, we're going to do this again here very soon, probably this week. I hope you have a great afternoon, and thank you for everything you've done so far. And thank you for supporting me. I'm Dr. Ardis. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Doc. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, buddy. Okay, bye.